Mike, welcome to the Tales of Leadership podcast, brother. How you doing?
I am doing great, Josh, and it is truly an honor to be here on Tales of Leadership. I've listened to your podcast on numerous occasions. Love the people that you have brought onto, this platform, and sharing ideas on leadership. I think is just truly outstanding.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and it's always like humbling to hear too, because I started this journey a couple years ago, just wanting to like pull out of my brain all the leadership lessons that I've had from like my amazing mentors that I've had through the military. And it's always humbling when people do reach out and say, "Hey, like I learned something from you," which for me, I have that imposter syndrome. Still, I was like, "Oh, you learned something from me." I was like, it's humbling from someone from your background. And I think that would be just an absolute great place to start. And I love having this first question of how you define leadership because I think it sets this tone for the episode as we continue to go through.
Great question. The definition I've used for many years now is I talk about it being the skill of
Mm,
positively caring for and inspiring others for the common good. And
mm.
and the reason I use that definition, I love the word skill in there because I believe all of us have the ingredients to be a leader.
Yeah.
It's where we are on the continuum on all those ingredients. But we can get better, just like you can get better at, walking, shooting a basketball, strength training, reading quicker,
Yeah.
where books you're reading. We can all improve. And leadership is an area we can actually improve upon with practice. And then I love, the positive, it's a mindset. We control two things in our lives, basically our attitude and our effort. No one can take that away from you. If you make that choice to have a positive attitude and positive effort, that's yours. No one can steal that from you. The caring for, I mean, to me, it goes back to an old Teddy Roosevelt quote, which I'm going to kind of rephrase this a little bit, but people really
Yeah.
don't care what you know until they know that you
Mm,
care. And we need to care for others. We need to inspire others, and so that they become motivated. See, I believe
yeah.
you motivate yourself, you inspire others. And so, how do we inspire others so they are motivated? And then the common good means we're working what I would call an ethical and a virtuous goals in mind. So that's
Mm.
how I kind of come up with that definition.
That's a beautiful definition. And I love how you tied that Teddy Roosevelt quote into it. Because it's so true. And I think how you labeled that attitude and effort, those are the two things that we can control. And I think that everyone is a leader, regardless if you see yourself that way, because you have to lead yourself. And that's
Exactly.
where the models that we have to do in terms of the behaviors and the values that we want to model into the world, you have to start that with yourself and then it carries on. So I think that's an absolutely beautiful definition.
Well, thank you, and I totally agree with you. One of the main keynote speeches I give is actually titled "Lead You to Lead Others."
Oh wow. That's interesting. How did you learn that kind of that leading yourself first? Like was that through college coaching or was that through like reflection?
It's been a long process. I'm sitting
Yeah.
here. This gray hair is here for a reason. I've been around the sun a few times. I was very fortunate. I had and I played high school and college football back in the '70s,
Mm,
and I had two men, head high school coach and head college coach, that even though the term servant leadership really wasn't in vogue at that time,
yeah.
they were truly servant leaders. And the
Mm,
reason they cared about people first, and they were more concerned about how you were developing as a person, how you were going to go forward in your life,
yeah.
before they cared about football games. Now, both of them were very successful. I mean, between my last 2 years of high school playing for his head coach, I mean, we lost a total of 3 games. You
Oh,
know,
wow.
all through college, lost a total of 5 games. And so these were very, renowned, coaches and successful coaches in terms of the scoreboard. But what I think they really did is they modeled and
Mm,
really took after the role of servant leader before that was a term. And through that time, I just been very fortunate, from reading, conversations, listen, as technology improved, you listen to TED Talks, you listen to podcasts, all those things have helped shape and put language into the things that resonated for me. One of the great stories, I mean, back in the early 2000s, I read a book called The Servant by James Hunter. Great book for people to read. Is his story and how he came about the servant leadership. And he tells it in a different way though. But I also had a chance to hear him speak in person.
mm,
And it just like, this is it. And I need to take this information and I need to start modeling this to a higher degree. And I need to try to help people
mm.
become servant leaders as well.
I, I got to figure out another thing. I always say this on every podcast is I love that, but I do. I love it. And so you have not only spent your life coaching and mentoring and training young men and junior leaders, you are constantly, and this is a theme that I see with what I like to call a purposeful, accountable leader, someone who shows up with integrity and makes an impact, is that they're curious and they're constantly improving themselves. And you continue that theme. So that's awesome. And one of the things that I've noticed too, growing up playing sports, is I had like 2 different types of coaches. I had a coach that focused on you as a person and developing you as a young man when I was going through football, or someone who was just solely focused on skills. And I think I've had a greater impact from mentors growing up, like a Mr. Stump or a Mr. Bennett, and I can remember them vividly in my mind
Yep.
because they grew me as an individual and as a young man. And those principles, were just instilled like, hey, let's get the small things right. If you can do the routine things routinely, everything else will just
Yep.
fall into place. And I love how you kind of walk through that.
Yeah. To me, it's a constant, I use the word pilgrimage as opposed to journey.
Mm,
And the reason I do that is because a pilgrimage, by definition, continually gives you a new and expanded meaning in your life. And
mm,
I really believe we need to live pilgrimages as opposed to a journey going from point A to point B.
yeah.
We need to embrace each day as a special gift. And that gift will continue to provide us new and expanded meaning. And so that's how I just look at it.
I think you and I have almost like a similar motto in life, and mine is every day's a gift, don't waste yours. And I've developed that through reflecting on some of the most extreme memories that I could possibly think of, like while deployed or going through training programs or whatever it is, and just remember how bad those days could be. And then when I encounter a problem today, it just helps me recenter of like, is this truly a problem or is it just an obstacle? But hey, today's a great day. My family's fed. I have a job that I love and I'm doing something with purpose. So let's continue to move forward. And I love how you kind of frame that too.
Well, and one of the things I think you can relate to is we are going to have chaos in our lives.
Absolutely.
We're going to have crucible events, those unplanned, unforeseen things that are going to happen. And how we react in those situations is crucial. I share a story a lot. When I was the head football coach at Luther College in Decorah, Iowa, I still remember it was October 16th, 2010. Had a
Yeah.
freshman football player who had made it to playing on special teams. And in the third quarter, he goes out. We had just scored. We were trying to get back in a ball game. He goes down the field to make the tackle, makes the tackle, doesn't get up, and ended up, and the young man's name is Chris Norton, doesn't get up. We end up learning, of course, that day he had fractured C3 and C4.
Wow.
And the doctors had given him basically initially a 3% chance of any movement below the neck. However, because of the, we talked about attitude and effort, because of his attitude, his effort, because of his family's attitude and their efforts, because of the attitude and effort of his friends and all the medical personnel. Now, he still spends most of his time in a wheelchair, but he has movement. And he was able to, with the assistance at that time, his fiance, walk across the stage and get his diploma. He was able to, after they got married, walk 7 yards down the aisle after the wedding together, arm in arm, so to speak. And it's a beautiful story. It's on TV. It's on a movie. There's a movie called 7 Yards. Highly recommend to anybody to watch this movie. It is inspiring. It'll tell you his story. And you see all these dynamics in terms of how to take a tragic event and never allow it to be a tragedy. And so, it's a great story.
I always talk about like team building, at least with team building, is there's two ways to do that: through repetition, just being around people long enough, and then hardships. Going through shared hardships together just galvanizes relationships. And that's why I think, like in the military, like some of the men that I deployed with in 2012, I could meet them just like how we're having a conversation today and pick right back up where we left off. And I think people probably on the football team around Chris's time, they probably could do the same thing. And you 100% could pick up a conversation with any one of those athletes, which I think is absolutely critical. But how did you help frame your team when they went through that hardship? That's a significant thing. How did you get them across that?
Well, I had already I've been working on, frameworks. Okay, how do you embrace chaos? And then how do you lead yourself? So I've been working on framework like that for a number of years. This made it very visible. And it really put it to the forefront. And so as I look at it, there's what I call 5 tools that help you first embrace the chaos. One is to stay calm. And I know they probably talk to you guys in the military about that. You need to stay calm. If you panic, you're in trouble. Okay. So we work on strategies. I'll work with people one-on-one. How can you best stay calm? And one of the things that, I work with them on is I want you to list all the crazy things that could possibly happen in the next 24 hours. And then if you know that, now imagine that happening and staying calm with it happening. Okay. So staying calm is number one. Number 2 is understand you're going to need others. None of us lead by ourselves. We don't lead ourselves by ourselves. We don't lead others by ourselves. We're going to need others. And there's a variety of roles others play. There's some that are going to be directly helping you. There's some that are going to basically help the person who's helping you. There's some that are going to encourage you and encourage the people helping you. And you need to embrace all those roles. And I think it's critical. You need to understand you need to be able to play in that role as well. You need to be the one helping somebody else. You need to help the person who's helping somebody. You need to be the encourager. And so you're going to need others. The third one that I think is tool is what I call that vision of no matter what. Okay? And it came about actually. This is, I'm going to bring some movies in here again. Watching Apollo 13. And if you remember in the movie, if people who know the movie, they basically at one point he says, failure is not an option.
Yep.
Okay. Well, we all know failure is going to happen at some point, but the mindset there was, we're going to make it happen. We're going to believe in our process. We know what the mission is. We know what our values are. We are going to do everything we can, no matter what, to make it happen in the positive. And I think, that's one of the things that Chris did more than anything else in his story. He had that no matter what. And that transcended throughout the entire team, within the program, within the school, within the community, etc. The fourth tool is what I call and then some. So many of us stop when it gets hard.
Yep.
And can you continue battling through it? My guess is you were in some boot camp training sometime, and it might have been really easy to stop, but you didn't. You went the extra mile. You went and then some, because what we just talked about, that no matter what mission was still in your mind, and you were going to go that extra mile. So you got those 4 tools. And then the last one actually goes back to what I talked about in a definition, attitude and effort. Is it positive? Where are you at with that? And in each of those, you can measure yourself and self-reflect. And you already talked about self-reflection. You need to be able to have honest self-reflection
100%.
to lead yourself and to lead others.
Yeah.
And so that needs to be there. So those are the tools in terms of embracing it. And then, the big thing I talk about all the time too, then, is how do you build your foundation? You talked about leading yourself. Well, each of us needs to have an address, our home. You have a mission. You have a mission. You have your own purpose in your life. And I know one of those purposes is to share leadership with as many people as possible.
Absolutely.
But you also have the mission and vision of the military.
Yeah.
Okay. And fortunately for you, they're probably marrying up pretty well.
Very synergistic. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, but you need to build a foundation. And I use, I joke with people, I'm a dumb old football coach. Okay. And I like to keep things simple, but one of the simple nursery rhymes is the 3 little pigs.
You're a man after my own heart, just so you know that. So I consider myself a dumb infantryman, and I follow the keep it simple, stupid framework. So
there you go. So, but when in the fairy tale, the 3 little pigs and the big bad wolf, one builds a house in straw, one's got sticks, and one's got the brick.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the one with the brick took time to build their foundation, their house, their address. And the big bad wolf, that represents the chaos we know is inevitable, the setbacks, the challenges, that's what that represents. And if you have a great foundation, you can handle that. And so to build that foundation is where, again, I try to keep things simple. I came up and what I talk about now is my handful of L's.
Okay.
And there's 5 L's that I believe people can work on each and every day to help themselves to be able to lead themselves and, if applicable, lead others. And the L's are basically continue to learn, continue to laugh, and that incorporates, we know humor is important. And my guess, even in the midst of that boot camp, in those trainings you were in, there was some humor in between.
So there's some similarities there too. So I know, like, through Chris Norton's story of when he was going through that rehab and recovery, humor played a very large part of that. And in the military, it's funny that I've kind of reflected on some of those memories. In the middle of an engagement or in the middle of a firefight, we find humor in just having conversations with people. So it's funny how that transcends either in the military or in the civilian world or athletics.
I think there's a lot of symmetry between military athletics, and I actually believe that symmetry is within business as well.
100%.
So now you got the 2 L's. You got, you learn, be a continual learner, you laugh, continue to listen. And I talk about, imagine two water sprouts coming down. One is hitting a brick, one's hitting a sponge. Well, the one that's hitting a brick, the water goes everywhere. Okay. That's the person who's listening to respond. The one that's hitting the sponge, that sponge is absorbing that. Well, that's the person who is listening to understand. And I believe we need to continue to work on ourselves. If I'm working one-on-one with somebody, I'll give them a task for the next few days before we meet again. And I'll say, okay, when you come back, I'm going to ask you about 3 conversations that you've had with somebody, whether somebody at work, somebody at home, you were sitting at a coffee shop, whatever the case may be. And I want you to bring back and tell me as much as possible what you talked about, what they talked about, not what you talked about, what they talked about. And I've done the same thing when I teach classes, and I still do some adjunct teaching in between, is I'll have people share. We do a lot of sharing back and forth. And when they report back, they don't share what they shared. They have to share what the other person said. And so by doing that, you do 2 things. One, you improve your listening skills.
Yeah.
But you also provide value to your partner, to the other person that was sharing to you. And I think that's critical. The 4th L is continue to live. You as well as anybody know, you got to be in the arena.
Yeah.
Okay. And there's no guarantees. And I use the Teddy Roosevelt. I got the plaque on the wall in my office. My daughters all have a replica of the plaque. It's not the critical counts, nor the person who tells how the strong one stumbled, or the doer deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the person who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs and comes short again and again, who knows the great devotions and spends himself in a worthy cause, and who at the best knows the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if they fail, at least fails while daring greatly, so that their place shall never be with those cold and timid souls that know neither victory nor defeat. And I challenge people, be in the arena. We're not going to be perfect. No one on this earth is perfect. We all make mistakes. And so you need to live. Okay. And I've done it in a lot of different ways. I have a great fear of heights. I've always had that. Okay. I also, back in 2011, jumped out of a perfectly good airplane.
Now you and I share that commonality.
And I've actually done it twice. And it was kind of like overcome. Hey, you got this fear, be in an arena, Now there was some safety with it. And of course, I did get a kick out of the waiver you have to sign with that one. Says the very first line, you may die from this activity. Okay. Yeah. Understand that, but it was still worth it. And then the 5th L is continue to love. And this is where I think servant leadership has a great pathway. Yeah. Because when you serve, you are making love visible. And it's a quote that I've kind of borrowed from a guy named Tom Thibodeau, who is in charge of a servant leadership program at Viterbo University here in Western Wisconsin. But to say it again, service is love made visible. And when we serve others, we're sacrificial. We are doing everything we can to help them. Yes, you have to be honest. And sometimes people think, well, servant leadership means you let somebody just do whatever. No, that's not servant leadership.
Yeah.
You need to be honest with people, and here are the expectations. Here is what we have agreed upon to be our mission, be our goals. And if we're not hitting those, we need to be honest with each other. And then if there's a servant leader, though, is going to walk up and say, Joshua, how can I help you more so that we realize these goals?
Yeah.
They're going to find solutions as opposed to just, kind of berating somebody. And so I think that's the essence of continuing to love. And like all good, children's cereal, there's always a prize at the bottom of the box.
Yeah.
And then within my handful of L's, I have a bonus L. And it's the it's the L of legacy. And it's a legacy that you leave with others. But when your mind and your heart and your soul are open to continue to learn, continue to laugh, continue to live or listen, continue to live and continue to love, others will leave a legacy upon you. And that is really beautiful.
There is just so much to unpack there. Overcoming hardships. I love those 5 steps. And one that kind of sticks out with me is I kind of label it the vision or like the burning desire. And to blend both of our worlds together, like the Cortez moment, right, where he burnt the ships at the beach. I think of a modern day burning desire, or just an unwavering resolve that we will move forward, is an air assault. So let's say you're in an air assault, you're in helos, you're getting ready to go insert on an enemy objective, and eventually they're going to touch down. And when they do touch down, you're on the ground and it's you and your men. You have to clear the objective. You have to achieve your mission, or you're not going to leave. And at worst case, you don't come home if you don't achieve your mission. Right. At best case, you all come home. And I think, and that's really helped me, because I've had to do that in real life. And that's really helped me kind of understand, like, I apply that same mindset to everything that I've done in life. And then one thing I've learned too is optimism is the currency that leaders expend. If we are optimistic, it is contagious. It just goes throughout the formation. And what a side effect of that is what you've talked about, is risk taking. The weighing the likelihood and understanding the consequences. If we can understand those, then we will move forward and we'll do bold things collectively as a team. So that was one of the big takeaways. I've already wrote like 4 pages of notes. And that I love too how you talked about the 5 L's of live. And one thing that kind of sticks with me there is emotional intelligence plays a big role in how you talked about jumping out of an airplane. There's self-awareness and self-management, how we process emotions, and then how we move forward in the world and how we actually follow through. The only way to get through things that scare us is to go do them. That is a very, very important nugget. And I wanted to make sure people understood that, because that was straight fire, Mike. We could end the podcast episode now, because you've done everything amazing.
Well, thank you. It's through all these years and the number of things you experienced during a lifetime. Chris's story is one. I had a university that basically said, we no longer need your services. We want you to resign. That's the coaching profession saying you're fired. Okay. They just use different language. And, that could have really brought me down. What it led to was my next role. I was coaching for a few years, and all of a sudden the president of the university comes up and goes, Mike, how'd you like to do us a favor? I said, you really only have one answer there. Okay. Yeah, sure. No. And he goes, I want you to take over student life for the university and be part of my cabinet. Now, wow. Understand, at that point where I was at, there were 2 positions between him and I in terms of reporting. I was going to get bumped all the way up here. And I basically looked at him and I said, Jeff, my background is in teaching people to be PE teachers, to be a football coach, and some aspects, been around athletic administration. You want me to run student life? He goes, I don't care what your background is. I know how you make decisions. I know how you process things. I know you believe in our mission. That's what I want in this role. And you will learn the things along the way. And will there be chaos and setbacks and challenges? Yes. I mean, in the first 48 hours, I had a sexual assault case between 2 students, and I had a racial incident where people were posting things, and so I had, students that just, were ready to protest. They were protesting, and I had to go meet with everybody. That was my first 48 hours. But all I did was, you remember the tools I talked about?
Yep.
I'd already kind of laid that framework for myself. I just used the tools. Stay calm. Don't run away from it. Okay. Don't run away from the situation. Don't run away from the conversations that need to happen, but stay calm. Know that you're going to need some others along the way.
Yep.
Make sure that vision is there. And so the decisions you make relate, are in conjunction with that vision. And I knew I had to go in then some. Didn't sleep much those first 48 hours. Okay. Yeah. But that was okay. And I knew I needed to stay positive and put my effort in here because, and I tell young professionals this all the time, students, young professionals, remember, every day is a job interview. Every day, people are watching to see how not that you make mistakes or don't make mistakes. They want to know how you react, no matter what the situation.
There's an organization that I used to support, and there's a motto within that is that every day's a tryout. Depending on how you show up, you don't have the job. It's how you show up in the moment every single day. And I wish I would have had someone in my corner when I was a young person like you, especially when I was a brand new first or second lieutenant, of staying calm. My emotions would always override my actions, and then they were just taking autopilot. And then eventually, I matured enough to where I realized, like, hey, I am angry, but I need to process that and figure out what are the next steps and do that in real time. And you coaching up till 2017, you then go take the lead for student integration on campus. How did so several questions there. How did the skill sets that you learned from being a football coach apply to that? And then, oh, by the way, COVID happened in 2020. So how did that work out?
Well, we'll get to COVID in a second because that's a pretty good story in itself. But really and truly, when we had that meeting and he said, "Here's what I want you to do," I thought about everything I learned through the years. And one of the things, I had some great mentors along the way who kept recommending, hey, don't just study football, study psychology, study leadership, study, how the business world puts their teams together. And so I had already been doing a lot of reading and looking at that. And so to me, and you've probably read the book, Turn the Ship Around by David Marquardt. And, what he did in terms of interviewing everybody, that's what I did when I got to my new role. I sat and talked with my direct reports, but all the other reports as well. I wanted to spend time and know what was on their mind. What did they see? And this is where anybody can give you a great solution. I had a student, RA, who said, Mike, she goes, I just took this course on my own, but it's an 8-hour mental health first aid certification course. She goes, I truly believe everybody should do this because we're dealing with mental health issues all the time,
100%
on campus. And from her advice, okay, this is a student who's probably like 3 rungs down from where I was at in my role. I put an initiative in, and we started requiring everybody in student life to be mental health first aid certified. And I'm certain it helped us. I know it helped us because we were able to recognize a couple situations where somebody was attempting suicide. We were able to get people there quickly before, one person had done enough where if we wouldn't have been there, within 30 minutes, they were going to be dead.
Yeah.
And so I know those things pay off. Now, is it going to be 100% perfect? No. but it really pays off when you start being preemptive about that. And then what really helped was one of the things you do in coaching, football coaching, is you really, sometimes we probably over prepare. We watch all this film, we get our game plans ready. We think of scenarios. What if they do this and what if they do that? Well, that's what helped me with COVID and I still remember our university chief of staff. I contacted them in January of 2020. I said, I think we need to start meeting and be ready for this. It's going to hit. Everybody was saying, and we actually started meeting in that January. And by the time March came around, we had plans in place because we knew some of the things we had to be able to do was our student body was better off being on campus than being sent home.
Yeah.
And so we had to have all the logistics in place. How are we going to do this, for the common good of each one of these students? And so all these kind of things played in. We made it work. We actually came back that fall in full strength. We had our residence halls filled. And while a lot of campuses across the country were still struggling with this, we said, no, we did some things with it in terms of where we placed people and how we had them check in if they didn't feel, if they weren't right, if they did come down with something. We had plenty of spaces. We had things in their community. We had allotted some space for students to basically, be alone. We had technology in place in terms of being online no matter what. And so it still worked. We were way under. We were like probably almost 50% under the numbers that were happening around the country.
Wow. And you kept everyone on campus, which was interesting because I was getting my master's degree at the same time. They're like 100% virtual. And what Major McMillian did was grow a beard. That's 100% what I did.
Well, and I think everybody had different, now I think it really behooves all of us. How do we handle that segment of our lives? And, you and I have talked about, I had the opportunity years ago. This was back in the early 2000s. I was at Fort Lewis on an educator's trip, sponsored by the U.S. government and the military to experience what our ROTC students were experiencing during the summer. And one of the things that I'll always remember, I still have this, a copy of the card, was the AAR, or the After Action Review card. And I remember going through that, and they were teaching us why they do it, the purpose of it, how to do it, how to be honest, don't hold anything back. Don't, if you made a mistake, that's okay.
Yep.
Because we're going to learn from these mistakes so that the next time you're in a situation, you're going to do better. And, I still think about those COVID years and the things we did, and think about how we did it, knowing that in case something ever happened in the future, we can basically share some ideas. Hey, here are some ways to maybe do this even better than what we did before.
Yeah. Fort Lewis is near and dear to my heart because that's my first duty assignment. So I went there, 4th Battalion, 23rd Infantry Regiment, the Tomahawks, immediately deployed. My wife had the best time in the world, and I had the worst time in the world. But the AAR concept was something that I learned when I was going through college and when I was in the National Guard before, when I was prior enlisted, but it really didn't land on me until we were getting ready to build up a deployment. We're going through all these different training exercises, starting all the way from individual soldier tactics up to company level and battalion live fire exercises. And we're trying to determine TTPs, or techniques, tactics, and procedures, or standard operating procedures, SOPs, so we could have our book ready when we go deploy. So we could have a quick, easy access of what we'd want to do. And we'd always do these AARs. And what I've learned, when you have those types of conversations, you have to set up the ROE right out the gate. Like, an ROE stands for rules of engagement. So number one, what we're going to say in here is for the betterment of the organization. Anyone has a voice. It doesn't matter what your rank, duty, position, title is.
Yeah.
Number two, have thick skin, because not everyone is the best communicator, especially in the infantry. There's at least several F words in every sentence, and that's okay. But just don't criticize
Yeah.
individuals. Don't point out individuals. Provide constructive criticism for the team, and really what an AAR concept is. And it's so beautiful because it follows the framework that you and I love as KISS, but it's a feedback loop, and everyone needs a feedback loop to continue to iterate and get better. And now I see that process throughout my entire journey, acquisitions and engineering, and like all it is just feedback loops, getting information real time so you could iterate and become a better version of yourself.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And actually, because it relates for me, there are a number of years where I actually taught statistics for
Oh,
people who are going to be PE majors and going in the coaching profession. And a lot of people hate math.
I hate
And
statistics.
okay, but I used to start off, and there's an author, Ketchikan is his name, and he puts this diagram into his books, and it's a
Mm,
beautiful diagram. You have the world before analysis,
yeah.
then you measure, then you have to manipulate and make sure you can present that
Mm,
measurement so people understand. Then you need to evaluate it, and then you have the world after analysis.
mm,
But it runs a full circle because it keeps going. And so we must constantly think about, here's the world. Let's make sure we look to see what's happening.
yeah.
Numbers are great. Sometimes you're using words and feelings and emotions, etc., but you're still measuring, you're still manipulating, putting those things, one of my mentors spent 27 years as director of research and development in the NFL.
Oh, wow.
And his thing was his job was to take all the information and provide the head coach a one-page summary
Mm,
saying, here's what this all means. And then they could evaluate that and say, okay, this is how we need to move forward. That's your world after analysis. But it just keeps going around in a circle.
yeah. It kind of goes back to the Mark Twain quote, and I don't know it verbatim, but sorry, I couldn't write short of how can you distill down information, like a 40-page white paper or an entire book, into a very short, concise document that is tangible, that has metrics associated to it, and it has the so what labeled. Because at the end of the day, as you grow, and have you grown in your leadership, one thing that is always less of is your time. So you have
Yeah.
to be able to distill
Mm.
down information quickly and make a decision rapidly, and that's hard to do. And as much as I joust that statistics is the devil, quoting the water boy, um, I genuinely grew to love it, and I may or may not do cost benefit analysis now when I try to make decisions in life, hard
Yep.
decisions. So,
No,
so
that's
kind
it.
of,
And then I would just throw in with that. I mean, we use all these things. Okay. A quote I like to use is, when the opportunity arises, it's too late to prepare.
yeah, that's a
And
great
and
quote.
and 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 so we need to constantly doing this, and that's part of our preparation to be a better version of ourselves as we go forward in every day. And the brevity for which we can say things. Pete Carroll, longtime successful college and NFL coach, wrote a book called Win Forever. In the
Mm,
book, he challenges the reader to write their purpose statement, their why,
yeah.
in 25 words or less.
Whew.
And so that's where, basically for me, it's, want to know every day in every way, living life, creating a transformation of self and others to be better. There it is. I mean, that's my why. And what I love, it took me 3 months to write that, to get it
Oh, I
down.
bet.
All right. But what it did is, and I started thinking about it because I wrote this before I even got into student life or doing a lot of other things in my life now. And I think about that why, my
Mm,
purpose, it transcends anything I'm doing. So whether I was coaching, teaching, an administrator, speaking,
yeah.
doesn't matter. That holds true for everything I'm doing.
Mm. That's a great practice I think that anyone should do, regardless if you're in an active leadership role, because it goes back to the concept of self-leadership. We're all leaders of ourselves. So what is our purpose? And I like to think of it in like a waterfall concept of what are we passionate about? What do we just like wake up in the morning and just love
Yep.
doing, know we're going to do it? What do we find purpose in? That intrinsic motivation to physically do uncomfortable things in
Yep.
difficult times. And then the last one is precision. Once we have a passion and purpose, what's our assignment? How are we going to go make an
Yep.
impact? And if we
Yep.
can do those three
Yep.
things, I think that is such a valuable tool, regardless of where you are in life. If you can just do that exercise, I think you'll find fulfillment. And I think that's one reason too. One of my whys is veteran suicide.
Oh,
And
yeah.
people get out of the military, I feel that they lose such a deep sense of purpose. Like, hey, you wake up every morning, you
Yep.
have someone telling you basically what to do every single day. You have a very purpose-filled mission, and then you get out and you're left to your own devices. And the longer you stay in, the more institutionalized you become, and the harder it
Yep.
is to transition out.
Yep.
So that's a powerful exercise.
Yeah, exactly.
So kind of transitioning to what you're doing now. So you've
Yep.
been a highly successful college coach, transitioned into more of administrative roles. You've been a teacher. You got a PhD in, was it ministry?
Ministry. Yeah. Doctor of ministry.
When did you do that?
Wow, that's interesting. I actually started in February of 2020.
so,
Eh,
so
right as
COVID wasn't hard enough.
Yeah, COVID wasn't hard enough in all the things I was doing. I actually started in February 2020,
Wow.
and it was a little bit of people were looking at what I was doing and how I did it in that student life role. And the
Yeah.
University of Dubuque is where I was at, and they also have, uh, in conjunction with the university, have a theological seminary. And a couple people asked, Mike, why don't you do this? Well, at the
Mm,
time, they had a rule that said you had to be an ordained minister to go for your doctorate of ministry. Well, I'm not. And I said, and they said, we don't care. We like to try this anyways. And we think you're the candidate we want to do that with. So I finally made a decision after about 6 months of discussion to
oh,
start
wow.
my doctorate of ministry, knowing that I would actually retire from higher ed before I would finish my degree.
Wow.
But it was probably the best thing I did because it gave me more perspectives, gave me
Yeah.
more understanding in terms of what I was dealing with on a day-to-day basis. Uh, it kind of forced my hand to read even more because we were reading like 20 books a year
Oh,
as
wow.
part of the curriculum, which was fine. I mean, they're great, great books. I still have them all sitting here on the bookshelf. And I reference a number of them to this day. But it really just set the tone, and it really meant, Mike, live your first L of continuing to learn.
Yeah. Along the way.
And so that was a big reason for it. And yeah, and I was able to, within my dissertation, combine leadership with faith.
Mm,
So I basically synthesized leadership concepts, a lot of what we already talked about, by between faith-based leadership research and secular research, and then assign them within the mainly Roman Catholic Church, but some other Orthodox churches use them as the Stations of the Cross.
yeah.
And basically, it's Jesus's passion and how each of these concepts relate to each of those stations. And then I put a workbook together. We did seminars on this. That was part of my dissertation. And, John Maxwell, who I know anybody who's interested in leadership reads John Maxwell. You have to. I mean, it's like
I was getting ready to bring that up.
yeah. But John Maxwell will tell you, if you ask him what's the best leadership book ever written, and he will say the Bible.
Yeah.
And there's so much truth in that. It's not even funny.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to like the John Maxwell Foundation. I wanted to make sure I looked this up to come together, to come alongside leaders around the world and add value to them so that they can multiply value to others. And that his foundation, we talked about this, the
Yeah.
foundation of leadership is a faith-based foundation. It's a values-based foundation. And the whole goal is to build a better leader so they can multiply and create a bigger ripple effect in the world. John Maxwell is a huge resource for faith. And another one I'm curious if you've read, Jesus CEO. Have you
Yep.
read that book before?
Yeah.
That
It's
was
on my shelf
so
over there.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites.
I don't know how many different, I have Jesus on leadership. I mean, you name it. I was using a lot of those to research when I was writing my dissertation. So,
Yeah. So what are you doing now?
so now, the way I look at it, I'll use the word retire
Yeah.
only from a framework, because I really don't think I've retired. I've repurposed myself.
100%.
And in my repurposing, my goal is to share from my learning experiences, a lifetime of learning experiences, with others so that they can actually be better than I ever was
Yeah.
in what they
I
were
love that.
doing. And I simply just do it. I end up doing podcasts like this. I do keynote talks, conferences. I could be in a high school one day and I'm doing a facility management conference 2 days later. But I love, my father used to joke, most people have two fears in life: the fear of death and the fear of speaking in front of others. For our family, it might be a fear of death, but our other fear is not having an audience. So we are kind of, my sister did stand-up comedy for 3 years. Okay.
Ooh, I couldn't do that.
Yeah. We love audiences. So I love, sharing stories, because that's what speaking is you're just sharing
100%.
stories. And so I do that. I do work with some people one-on-one, trying to help them, if they come and say, I need some help, and we'll set up a program. We'll meet for a few months and I'll get them through some steps. We talked about those tools, in the handful of L's. I have a checklist that they go through to see how am I doing in this checklist, and so that they can become a better leader themselves, and again, if applicable, leading others. So those are the things I'm basically doing. I still read, I still research, and then I have this great joy of 5 grandchildren who live all within 20 minutes of me. And,
oh, that's awesome.
And so we do go to a lot of activities.
Tons of sports and games.
You got it.
Yeah, my daughter just started travel rugby, so this weekend we're going to New Jersey, so I have to drive 5 hours, 5 hours back. But I mean, honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. And I think you're living that next chapter of your life,
Yeah.
and I truly am inspired by the amount of service that you've done, what you're passionate about, how you continue to grow every single day, and some of the hardships that you went through. So one thing I'll take away from this episode is I 100% will go watch 7 Yards. I haven't got a chance to watch it yet. You may have now just provided me the fuel to my wife to buy Netflix, but we shall see.
Oh, it's actually not on Netflix anymore. Now you have to it was on there for 2 years. You have to do Apple TV or Amazon Prime.
Oh, I got Amazon Prime, so we can do that.
There you go. You got it.
So we're at our final show segment. These are the same rapid questions that I ask everyone on the Tells Leadership. If you're ready, we'll jump right into it.
Let's go.
All right. Number 1, what do you believe separates a good leader from an extraordinary leader?
How they care for others.
I love it. Number two, if you could provide or recommend one resource for someone who's listening to this show that can help them on their leadership journey, what would it be?
There's a book by Doris Goodwin called Leadership in Turbulent Times.
I've
Must
never heard
read
of
it.
that one.
Must read it. It gives you, I think it's 4 or 5 different examples of great leaders and how they did it.
Mm. Number three, what is one critical leadership lesson that anyone listening to this show can apply in everyday life?
We use Walt Whitman's quote, be curious, not judgmental,
Mm.
and listen like a sponge as you do that.
Last one, and this is always the hardest. Where can our listeners find you and add value to what you're doing today?
Best way to find me is on LinkedIn. If you just type in my last name and then put the initials after that of DMIN, which is Doctor of Ministry, I'm the only one on there like that. So that's their fastest way to find me. Send me a note. And if you say elf or free or whatever you want to put in there, I'll send you the checklist on a handful of L's.
Mike, I'm so glad that we were able to make this connection. I'm not joking. I think I have like 6 pages of notes because I love learning from every one of the guests I have on here. And I've learned so much from you, and I'm inspired by what you've done and what you continue to do. So thank you for everything.
Well, thank you, Josh. It's really been an honor and a pleasure to be on your podcast, as Tales of Leadership. I think what you're doing is fabulous. I mean, you're bringing in high quality people that I am just humbled to be a part of the show this way. And to me, when we talk about this, and I know I shared it once before, but I just sincerely pray and my thoughts are with everybody to keep your minds and your hearts and your souls open as you continue to learn, laugh, listen, live, and love. And everybody on this show can be blessed with that bonus L of legacy.
I love it, brother. Have a great day, and thank you again for sharing your time and wisdom.
Thank you very much.